hopefully many of you have attended the first session, which was just an introduction to assessment in general. So some of you might have, looking at some of the feedback, most of you found that really useful, especially if you were really new to assessment in general. It wasn't just linked to the IAC, so it was hopefully of use to you in terms of putting assessment that you do in the workplace in context as well. Today we're going to focus on summative assessment and particularly look at examples of the reflective narrative of the IAC, and it's going to give you a chance to give sort of decisions on that in terms of how you would mark it, etc. So we'll come to that now. Excuse me. So what we're going to use Slido again for recording some of your feedback about the different examples of IAC from a reflective narrative from last year. So you'll need to go to slido.com and you've got the code there that you can see, which is #STPassessor2. And as per usual, there's no need to log in. But that will come up on the screen. So if you don't get a chance to get that done, log in now, access it now, then we can do that. You will do when we get to the polls. So what we're going to be doing this afternoon is we're going to hope, by the end of the session, you'll be able to engage in assessing the summative assessments particularly for today for the IAC. Have a look at how to write constructive feedback for the different grade descriptors and use effective and probing questioning techniques to elicit evidence of learning, which is linked to the interview part of the IAC. Recap, and as a starting point, and to see if you're able to get onto Slido, our first question today are what the key characteristics of summative assessment. And if I open that up, it might be that annoyingly it does not go automatically to it. So go there, it should do. Should be able to see that. So as a starting point, so if you're just joining us, if you go to slido.com, what you'll see on the screen, and put in that event code there, you'll be able to participate in the first poll. So just as a quick recap from the previous session and to help set the scene for this one, what are the key characteristics of summative assessment? Excuse me. Is everyone able to get onto there? You okay, Isabel?
I don't know if you can see the chat. None of us can see the screen. It's just a black screen coming up for us on your PowerPoint, so we can't get onto the Slido either.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
Could you see it? It's showing that it's sharing it.
I can see it now.
Has it come up?
Yeah, I can see it. Hopefully other people can as well now. They're just, I don't know, yeah, I think a few people are commenting saying they can see it.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That's very odd, because it was showing a red line around mine, which shows that it's sharing it. That's very odd. Who knows? One of those glitches. Thank you. I thought it was odd nobody was putting anything, so okay. It's more so a description of formative assessment in terms of ongoing progress. But if you mean by sort of achievement, we tend to think of the word achievement for summative assessment. So there should, there'd be a sort of assessment brief as such, time limited, so it would be by a particular point. Whereas if it was something formative, something that you can revisit and potentially take your time with, and have multiple attempts at. Fair and accessible achievement at the end of a module, judgment of competence, assessment against preset criteria, and there'll be grade descriptors, there'll be sort of a marking scheme for it, fitness to practice, so it's assessing that, bringing that together, particularly with the IAC if we're thinking of it in terms of that. Okay. So someone else was about type and accountability. Okay, that's brilliant. So let's bring up hopefully, can you see that now, Carol?
Yes.
That's fine. You just open it up so I can see presenter view for me. Okay, so in terms of, this is one that I shared last week, but if we sort of skip to the summative bit, it's very much about that end of a unit or a programme to determine achievement. So when we look at formative assessment, that tends to be the ongoing, continuous sort of progress, and summative assessment, we relate very much to the fact that it's that overall achievement. And this is something that I shared last week, so I won't spend too much time on this. But these are the sort of 5 main processes, which are very similar to formative assessment, but they're just implemented slightly differently. So questioning will come up in relation to the IAC interview itself and responding to the scenarios. We are going to look at about the importance of giving feedback today for summative assessment, and using success criteria, so basically assessment criteria, so that the trainee and those assessing recognise what success looks like and what's expected of the individual. Itself that the trainees produce is itself a part of, demonstrate something in it, but it's that independent learning as well. And then finally, there is an element of formative assessments that are being used in a summative way in relation to the art. That
Hi, Sally, sorry to interrupt.
Individual.
Your audio is very slow, and I wondered if you maybe want to turn your video off. It might come a bit.
Yeah, I can do. I'm obviously having technical difficulties today, which is quite unusual. So let me see. Let's go back. I don't know if that's any better. Is that okay?
Yes, that seems to be more normal speed now, yes.
Okay, that's great. If that continues to be a problem, I'll just have to leave and come back in if it comes up again. So in terms of using self-assessment, trainees are having to demonstrate skills such as being evaluative, critical, self-critical, self-aware, and reflective. And so they've got to be able to evaluate their own work and their own learning and bringing that together. And that then forms part of the interview process as well in the IAC. Okay. So in terms of feedback, then, that's the element that we're going to focus on first. So if we think in terms of formative assessment, so if we go back to that ongoing, assessment, if you think about all their workplace assessments and they're producing competencies, etc. Why is constructive feedback essential for when they're undertaking formative assessment, just as a starting point? Yeah, so we know that formative assessment is very much about learning, and feedback's essential for that. So what they need to work on and do that, definitely. So identify areas that also what can be used, which takes some planning, is peer assessment and feedback as well, which can help both parties in terms of their development. To identify knowledge gaps for CPD, yeah, to help reflect on their achievement, their strengths as well as weaknesses, yeah. Yeah, so it's about how that's delivered. If it's, overly, it can be two sides of that. It can be, if it's not constructive in the sense that it's really negative, then obviously that's going to affect confidence. And how that's delivered can mean whether they learn from it or not. So if it's just like, no, that, you're not doing very well with that, and, very dismissive, then they're not learning from it. But then if it's overly, if it's avoiding the gaps in knowledge because of fear of upsetting somebody, then they're not going to learn from that either. So it's about getting that constructive, balanced approach and building a relationship, professional relationship with another person. So the trainee, trusting yourselves or whoever's involved in their assessment is really important with that, as we know. And it reduces pressure on them, definitely. Yeah, if it's not going to have this immediate impact on their grade. Yeah, definitely. Okay. And another way of looking at it is that if with formative assessments no feedback is given, it's like trying to travel to a new place without a map. They don't know what's expected of them or what they need to improve or how to improve it if they're not given the feedback to do so. And it's about trying to change behaviours or reinforce behaviours or encouraging them to grow and develop. So there's an element of coaching there on the side of the assessor. And it's about giving them opportunities and developing trust with them, as we've already mentioned too. So that's fab. So let me go back to my screen. Let's see if it will do it. Let me see. Okay. So our next one then is what would make feedback helpful for trainees or the recipients of that feedback. So how can we make sure that it is actually helpful to them? So let me go back to here, which is going to be our ideas tab. Charlotte, oh, maybe not, I've lost it. Oh no, it's disappeared, so we'll ignore that one. Sorry about that. Having a few difficulties today. So if we go to this one then. So in terms of summative assessment, which we're going to focus on today, if you look at it from this perspective here, why would it be important to provide feedback for summative assessments? Okay, because a lot of the time we associate giving feedback as part of formative assessment, so that ongoing. But why is it just as important for summative assessment? Yeah, exactly. So same reasons. And sometimes traditionally, and you still get it with certain types of given, it's just, well, you've either passed or you haven't passed. But the trouble is that with that is very much linked to what is put there on the first one, that, you know, we've got to recognise that whatever assessment you undertake, learning never stops. So we think of lifelong learning, there's always room for feedback and improvement, and also to take that forward. Even if you can't change the outcome of that summative assessment, you can take the learning from that forward to other situations and other opportunities. And summative can be used formatively, yeah. Also want to improve for future summative assessments, exactly, yeah. And if you think about the different components of the IAC, so the interview component, for example, then there's things that the trainee can take away from that experience and the feedback that they get for future. They will be going through similar scenarios again, potentially. And, even down to sort of transferable skills of how well they felt they presented themselves or how well they communicated with those on the panel, except how well they dealt with unexpected technical difficulties and that kind of thing. So even down to those elements of it, they can reflect, and the feedback can really support their learning going forward. Okay, so we go forward then, let me see. So in terms of summative feedback, this is essential then for trainees to understand how they've come in meeting the learning goals of the course. So if you think about it, the IAC is going to be, as a summative assessment, it's coming at the end, it's consolidating and bringing everything together and saying, for the trainee to say, here I am, this is what I know, this is what I've achieved, and I am now ready to practice. But also it's essential for them to understand what they need to do next. So what they need to work on further, what they, for some, it might be what they might do as a next step in terms of study. as well. So some of them might be interested in eventually doing the HSST, for example, after the STP. And obviously they want to get some experience before they embark on that. But it'll give them, you know, sort of feedback that they can use to consider for that part of their learning journey as well. So it gives them insight into the skills that they've developed, the knowledge that they've developed and what they can do next. And this feedback can also have implications for the life choices that the students make. So it can motivate them, inspire them. And that's what we want to instill in them and demonstrate sort of good practice in relation to lifelong learning, and encourage them to have faith in themselves to develop as a reflective practitioner too, so they can take that feedback away and use it to shape what they do next. So in terms of a criteria of helpful feedback, a good way of looking at it is someone called Jeff Petty, who's done a lot on teaching and learning, and all sorts of aspects around teaching and learning. But I particularly like the way that he approaches giving good feedback, and it's very much around some of the things you'll recognise. So having things like medal, applied to formative feedback or summative feedback, either or. And it's looking at in terms of medals, you can probably guess that's what's been done well. So being very explicit about that, saying this is exactly, here's what we as a panel felt that you did really, really well as part of your IAC. So whether that's the reflective part or the interview or a combination of both, and providing evidence for that. So so rather than just sort of sweeping statements, it would be, we particularly liked X, Y, and Z. The response that you gave for scenario A were particularly good because, those kind of things can actually, they're worthwhile for them to take away and take forward, and it can increase confidence as well, because they, what you see might not be what they see in themselves. So having that given to them by someone who's experienced and who's a professional in the field can be really motivating for them. Missions are what the individual, so in this case the trainee, needs to improve upon or correct or to develop further. Okay, and that's important again. So it's not about it's got to be evidence-based, it's got to be supported. It can't just be sweeping statements. It needs to be based on actually what was seen or what was read in their reflective narrative. Excuse me. And then from that are clear goals. So they need to have clear goals to take away from them, and particularly take away from it rather, and that it's clarifies the success criteria. So that's where the evidence comes from as well, saying, we felt that you confidently showed that you were self-aware and knew the limitations of your abilities or role, but we still recognise that you are ready to practice and that you have a clear action on what you're going to do to improve or move forward. And this leads us to the next slide. So in terms of the feedback for the IAC, all trainees, pass or fail, must receive feedback on their assessment performance. So for trainees who have passed, comments can be thought of as feed forward, and for those who have yet to achieve, so there were gaps and they haven't quite passed, then we can see it as feedback, you know, in that sense, because say, right, you didn't quite get there, so this is what you need to do to move forward as such. So if we have a look now quickly at this, what are the characteristics of good quality feedback for trainees who have met the standard? So that can be, more of a challenge sometimes. It's easier to some ways give feedback to trainees who have got gaps because you can identify the gaps. But if they've met the standard, they've passed, what feedback can you give them that will help them move forward? Any ideas? Yeah, good start. Areas of strength, specific areas, yes, specific goals that they've achieved. Yeah, that will help them in the future. Oh. Be specific about what's particularly good and why. Yeah, definitely. Anything else? Yeah, so there's always areas of improvement. There's different ways to think about things. So I'd focus on understanding their clinical rather, yeah, decision making. Yeah, also I've seen it where, so although they've passed, there might be an area that will meet the criteria, or to pass, that wasn't as strong as the other areas, and one that sticks out sometimes is leadership, because you know sometimes don't always get because of just opportunities. They've demonstrated it enough for it to pass, but it might be something that they want to focus on more. It might be that their ambition is to be a training officer as well and to help, you know, in the future. So it might be that you give feedback on what they could do next in relation to that to develop it further. Might have picked up on a particular area that they're particularly passionate about as part of the science. And that might be something else that you suggest that they go, you know, what they can do to go and develop that further. Yeah, that it's easy to understand, definitely, the feedback. Yeah, and it's relevant to their individual assessment. Yeah, that it's not just cut and paste from somebody, yeah, just a generic statements, definitely. Identify areas where they could develop to do it to a deeper level. Exactly, yeah, it's that stretch and challenge, isn't it? Yeah. Areas for further development, yeah. Yeah, highlighting what they've done well as well as what they have not done so well yet. Yeah, so unpicking the whys behind what they've done so they can understand that better themselves and help make things transferable. Yeah. Check they haven't just learned it, or that it's just, you know, you think, oh yeah, they really understand that, but it might be that it was just a little bit, yeah, some aspects of it might have been a bit of fluke, you know, for want of a better phrase. So yeah, sort of giving that, you know, making sure that they understand that why behind it is really important. Yeah, definitely. And you can pick up on that as part of the interview process as well. Yeah, fab. Okay. So in terms of if they haven't met the standard then, so if they haven't passed, might not be all of it, might be just some aspects of it. What would be good quality feedback? And it might be that you pick up on similar things. They haven't met the standard. What might you put in? So they haven't passed. Yeah, I think that is the key thing. Be specific about why they haven't and what they need to improve. Yeah. So depending on the situation, so with that second one there, understanding what they know, if they can identify what's gone wrong and how to rectify it before launching into your own thoughts. And actually, that's a really good point. And I think the IAC reflects that quite well, because if you think about it, if they complete the reflective, obviously they've got to complete a reflective narrative, and then they have the interview. Things that you might think that are a gap in the reflective narrative can be brought up in the interview, as long as it is just based on the reflective narrative. Excuse me. And that's why we say that not one is worth more in marks than the other, because they're a collective assessment, definitely. And you might say, so why, actually present that to them in that way. So yeah, it's having that balance between what they've done well, and even if someone has dismally, failed the IAC, let's say, or an assessment, there will be aspects that you can draw upon to say, look, we've recognised that, that you've attempted to do this, and we can see, because for example, I saw one, I did read a narrative where it didn't flow very well at all, and they've got a bit bogged down by a particular model of reflection, and that's why we've stipulated which model of reflection to use since then. But they got so bogged down with it, and they didn't meet the criteria because it was really difficult to understand and to unpick. However, you can recognise with that they have put the effort in. It's just the way they went about it that really dragged them down and did not, they weren't able to achieve or even show their full potential through it. So it's about that aspect of it, is recognising the effort. What were they strong at? Specific details on why they haven't, and what they could do to meet the standards. Focus on what is needed, yeah. And make sure that it's evidence-based. So link back to that success criteria, and that the actual evidence is pulled out, from whether it was from the reflective narrative or from the interview, or a combination, that the evidence is there, definitely. Okay. So finally on that one is, what should feedback not do? It's important to keep these in the back of your mind when giving feedback. Demean, undermine confidence, be vague, not discourage them, yeah. Discourage. Anything else? Compare against other trainees, yeah, no, that's a good one. A good one, as in an example of what not to do, yeah. The other thing I would say as well, what feedback shouldn't do, is be personal, so it needs to be, so not judgmental in the sense of not linked to the criteria. That's why the criteria is there, the marking scheme is there to link it back to the language that is put in there, which can help reduce the risk of it becoming what might feel a personal attack. Unachievable, definitely. Being consistent, it's a really good one. Give no direction for improvement. Be overly prescriptive, yeah. Or be biased. Yeah, good. Excellent. Okay. So let me bring this back up. So in summary then, when we're giving good feedback, it needs to be outcomes focused. So it needs to be linked back to the expected outcomes of that assessment. It needs to be differentiated, because if it's just, oh, here's the feedback that we would give if it was a pass, and here's the feedback statements that we'll give if it was a fail, it loses its impetus then. And to a certain extent, you could argue that it's no point having the feedback in the first place if we're just going to do a cut and paste exercise. There's nothing wrong with having consistency in language though. So saying, well, we'll agree certain terms that we will use when we're talking about a pass or a fail in terms of some of the language, so that we can make sure that it isn't demeaning, etc., and that also it has that consistency. But in terms of if we know that giving good feedback is should be linked to evidence from the trainee's work or interview, then it needs to be differentiated, linked back to what their experiences were, and particularly with the IAP, because it's each one is going to be different in the sense that it's their own personal journey from novice to expert, if you like. So from over the 3 years showing their progress, then that's going to be different for different trainees. So it's making sure that that feedback is differentiated in that way. It's constructive. So what we mean by constructive is that it shows what went well and what didn't quite go so well, and what they could do differently next time, and gives them opportunities to reflect. So that's why having it as evidence-based and linked back to the intended outcomes is really important, because then they can reflect on what they feel they need to do differently, or what they want to do next, really, in terms of developing further, even if they've passed, what skills that they've sort of highlighted that they might want to improve upon following that interview. So it might not be directly linked to the role of a healthcare scientist, but it might be more around those other sort of transferable skills that they want to improve upon or develop further. And it should empower them, even if the outcome wasn't what they wanted it to be, and it might be to begin with, if it's hard to take, that going forward after some reflection, is it, well, actually, I did do that very well. I was a little bit nervous, and I think that affected my responses to the particular scenarios. I know it really. So what can I do to actually help myself next time if I've got to resit it? Not let the nerves take over. So it's those kind of things that the feedback should support them with. Excuse me. So what we're going to look at now is the actual using marking criteria, the assessment criteria. So we're going to look at the marking. Now what I'm going to do is I've already got that one open if I remember rightly, but I will put the links in the chat for you to access, including the marking criteria. Let me get those links from you. It's the easiest ways to do it. So what we're going to look at is, and I'm going to give you an opportunity, so it'll go quiet. So this is domain 1 that you're going to look at, and it's an example, and it's an actual example of somebody's IAC that passed, and this is the marking criteria. So you might want to open those up in 2 separate tabs on your device. So they're on our website, so they're you can find them after this session as well, if you want to have a look. So what we're going to do, I'll bring this back up again so we can talk about it. Let me find it. So you're going to read the, I'm going to give you some time to do this in a second. So you're going to read through the extract, which was the first link I put in the chat. And it covers it's an extract from the domain of professional practice that a trainee had written. So it's not the full response to the domain. And then you're going to use the marking criteria and spend time to decide your recommended outcome in relation to critical evaluation, analysis, and use of evidence. So on the marking criteria, it's got it written there, as you can see, and you're just going to focus on critical evaluation, analysis, and use of evidence. If I can go up somewhere there, okay. And so you're going to give a recommended outcome for each of those, whether you think it's excellent, good, requires improvement, or poorly executed. I will say they passed, but remember what we said, that sometimes, just because you think, well, it was good, it doesn't mean that there isn't elements that you think could be improved. And also, someone could not pass a domain fully in the reflective piece, but when it came to the interview, that brought it up. So remember that in terms of overall mark, but you'll get a briefing on that prior to doing the marking. Okay, still got about 3 minutes left, but what I will do, I'll open up Slido poll now. Let me find my cursor. You can start putting in what you see, what your decision was, basically, in terms of your grading, whether you think it was excellent, good, requires improvement, or poorly executed. So if we start with critical evaluation, you can drop that in. Any more? Only got 5 of you. Okay. I've got about 26. Oh no, I haven't quite. Sorry, I had a lie. Got about 16 of you. See if any more of you want to add something. So most of you put good. And when giving the feedback, you can use some of what's in the marking criteria there. So you could say, you know, you did produce a good evaluation, and here's some of the evidence for that. So, you know, you can use some of the language to link it back to the criteria, because that is important to do. And then 9% of you put excellent. Okay, so it's good that you either thought it was excellent or good. And you will get, yeah, you might think, well, if we were a group now deciding on doing this for real, deciding on the outcome, yeah, you might have some people that think it's excellent. You might have some people that think it's good when it comes to making a judgment, and that's where you have a conversation and you discuss the evidence if you're not sure. Okay, so that's not a bad thing at all, because you do get different viewpoints like that, which is fine. So if we then look at analysis then, so what would you say it was? Excellent, good, requires improvement, or poorly executed? More of a split so far with the excellent and good here. Okay, that's good. And remember, we're only looking at the reflective narrative here anyway as well. So the interview process will give another perspective overall as well. So yeah, we're really close there between the two. And that's not a bad thing. Yeah, it would be harder if it was between excellent and poorly executed, but the fact that it's between excellent and good, that's not a bad thing at all. And you know, that again, as a group, as a panel, you would discuss that and come to a consensus. Okay, that's fab. And then if we go to the last one, which was use of evidence, then how well do you think this individual provided evidence? Okay, yeah, almost again a 50-50 split. And it's funny actually, because with different groups I get different, you know, some I get very much it's all excellent, or you know, majority it's excellent, or it's a split like this, or it's very much a majority it's good. So you do have that kind of interpretation that and of course, this is just a snippet, so it's just a snapshot of the whole thing, which can make it a bit harder. But it's good to see that there is that sort of spread, if you like. If we were going to, let me just open this up. In terms of personalised feedback, what might you give? So in addition to maybe linking it back to the criteria and using, you know, some of the criteria to formulate your feedback, what personalised feedback might you give this person just based on that bit of extract that you've looked at? Is there any ideas? I'll give you, I won't rush you on that because it might be that you want to have a think about it. Yeah, that's a good one. So consider in more detail how the skills and experiences gained through training will be transferred to future practice. I think that's really important with any work-based training, particularly at this level, because it's too easy for a trainee to just consider it in that moment and relate it to that particular to pass a course kind of you know, this is what I've got to do to achieve this qualification. But encouraging them to take that step back and think, well, how are you going to use this moving forward? Because although you've got a readiness to practice at the end of it, that's not the end of your learning. That's not the end of your learning journey. So what are you going to do with that information? Yeah, that's a really good one with the analysis. Demonstrate more detail on how the skills transfer to other areas. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, many and varied examples are used that are relevant to the points being raised. And I think that's again really important. And I do recognise that you haven't got access to their portfolio. So when you're assessing, you will have access to their portfolio and you will be able to check the references that they've put in to make sure that they're accurate. Because, you know, looking at the evidence might actually make you change your mind about what grade you give it. So if you were going along the lines of excellent, and then if you had access to their portfolio and thought, actually that, you know, although they've put lots of references in here to different types of evidence, some of it is a little bit of a tenuous link to what they're trying to, the argument they're trying to put across, and that could help you decide whether it's good or excellent as well. Yeah, more examples in more detail needed for the critical evaluation. Okay, and that might be why you put it down. You know, you might give an overall grade that, you know, one section might be excellent, the other section might be good, but overall that balances it out to good. More reflection on their improvement in learning. Yeah, very clear and honest evaluation of competence and some good plans put in place to address areas of weakness. Yeah. Identify communication problems, sort a solution, differentiated from then on, so improve patient experience. Brilliant, yeah. Identify gaps in learning, recognise his own limits and identifies appropriate responses. Can identify risks and working to improve. Fab, yeah. That's great. Some really good pointers there. What I will say, there's one that came up. Yeah, it's an interesting one when it comes to problems. Because when we do the briefing with the trainees to prepare, you know, to prepare them for writing the reflective narrative and for the interview as well, we emphasise the point that it shouldn't be about blaming others, because, you know, particularly if you think of some of the trainees that we've had have had to do their training through COVID, and that has affected some of the experiences they might have had. But it's not about saying, well, there was COVID and I couldn't do it, move on. It's about, well, how did, you know, some have really demonstrated how they harnessed that as an opportunity. So they had to change what they were actually doing and do something different. but they actually use that as a learning opportunity rather than something that was as a blockage. Shows an awareness of the legislative and guideline framework in which we work. Aware also of the wider debates on best practices, including current research. Great. Collaboration with colleagues, yeah, to shape practice. Attitudes of leadership and focuses on patient outcomes and experience throughout the piece. Yeah, that's fun. Gaps in learning. Yeah. So it's giving that recognition, yeah, definitely, of what they've done well and what they might need to do slightly differently or to improve on. So that's brilliant. Okay. So to finish off then, what we'll just discuss briefly is the interview part of it. So particularly because a part of this is going to be the questioning, and we talked about that already in the sense of this is a key component of summative assessment as well as formative. So we said about having questioning and the formative assessments used summatively to demonstrate learning. So in terms of interview questioning, I'm going to ask you a quick question here. How can we make sure that the implementation of the interview is fair, transparent and reliable? Because we've got to make sure that it is, yeah, and it is quite a big it's a challenge in that sense, because you're having to balance the fact that each of the individual trainees are going to have a different experience. And so it's making sure that, oh, wait a minute, sorry, I've opened the wrong one. Let's do it in the Q&A instead, because my polls have disappeared for some reason. So if I ask you that question, you can put it in the Q&A there. How can we make sure that the implementation of the interview is fair and transparent and reliable as well? Multiple assessors, yeah, that's a good starting point. Yep. Yeah, so they have access to the same interview information. Adjustments are made to ensure equal accessibility. Yeah, definitely. We know if they've got any needs prior to it as well. Yeah, and that's their responsibility to make sure that we know about those, of course. Anything else? Some set questions for each specialty. Yeah, so they'll, if I remember rightly, Carol, it's like a pool of questions, isn't it?
Sorry, just trying to turn my microphone on. Yes, so there's a pool of case-based discussion scenario questions developed by specialists in your area, and the panel will select 2 from that pool.
Yeah. Yeah. And that the marking criteria is applied fairly. Those are some of the things that you can make sure. What kind of, if you think of the questions themselves, what can and can't you do regarding questioning, do you think? And you can just drop those in the Q&A also. you think of how you ask a question? How might that? Yeah, leading questions, definitely. So trying to avoid leading, well, you need to avoid them. So because, you know, it's a difficult thing, we recognise, because if you think about, you know, you don't want anyone to fail. But it is important to recognise that safeguard against that, definitely. Where are we? Yeah, training and evaluation of assessors is important. Moderation, yeah, so standardisation, and we do have also observers sitting on different panels as well to see that it's conducted fairly. Clear framework for assessing. Many assessors, yeah. Avoid leading questions. Produce a set of questions agreed to by the panel before the interview. Open questions with some closed follow-up, yeah. Limited number of closed questions, yes, definitely, because yeah, if you've got sort of too many closed questions, it can just lead to, you know, guessing, and it's difficult to assess whether they're ready to practice in that sense. Yeah, so avoid asking about obscure topics that not everyone in specialty would know about, and also you can't ask questions. Yeah, so that some people might not have had been able to do something within the department because of COVID, and it would, as an example that's happened in the previous ones, and it would, you know, they can't ask questions around that as such, you know, to say, because that would put them at a disadvantage. So yeah, you can't lead the trainee. You know, it's about, we talked very briefly last week about sort of bias, and there is such a thing as assessor bias. And it's about being aware about around things like your own beliefs about a particular assessment. So we mentioned that last week. So I said about that, you know, if I was someone that really felt like exams were a pointless type of assessment, and that it didn't really test people's real knowledge, it just tested whether they could undertake an exam or not, yeah, go through the process of exams, then me being a moderator of an examination, or being a marker for an exam, might not be, you know, I might bring with it a set of biases that would put the reliability of my decisions at question. So it's about us trying to overcome that in terms of accepting, you know, our beliefs around something, but also not letting that interfere with how we make a judgment, a professional judgment. So we need confidence in the process and assessment itself. So some of you come up with how to do that. So making sure that we've got multiple assessors, so that you have a panel of assessors rather than just one person. That helps give you more confidence in that process and in that assessment. Having training and briefings on to make sure that there's that consistency, that ensures more confidence in the process. Being able to shape the assessment before it's rolled out, which has done that. So in terms of when it comes to make it, into introducing the scenarios. That has very much come from the sector and has been included, and that gives people more faith in the process and in the assessment as well. But also our own experiences and our own emotions can actually have an impact on how fair or transparent or reliable a process is and as an assessment. And that's why, my analogy of exams, for example, it's being aware of that and parking that, and having those multiple assessors helps with that as well, as we've talked about. So that is, a starting point for you to start seeing what is expected. There will be briefings in terms of the specifics. Exemplars, that's a good one there. Moderation, just saw that one at the top there. Moderation exemplars to standardised marking, so that you can actually agree, have a go as a group and say, we have, we've come to a consensus there. So, in terms of just as a final, related to final point to make in terms of bias, we do encourage, if you haven't done so already, we do encourage unconscious bias, training, which is on the website. It's conscious inclusion, but it's looking at how we might understand some of the biases that we might have, and it around equality, diversity and inclusion. So if you do have time to, I know you might fall off your chair at the mere suggestion of time. I know we're all stretched, and you particularly in the sector, but it's worth looking at to sort of assess some of the biases that we might have, because everybody, we're human, and we might not consciously have them, but if we can try and understand those a little bit better, then that can help us reduce the risks of not having a fair and transparent assessment process and making decisions that are fair. So I can put the link for that into the chat. And then that's it from me. Sorry for the technical difficulties. And I hope you find it useful to have a look at an example. There are more example sort of extracts and full examples on the website as well for each of the domains. So if you want to have a look at those, you can find those on the website. This is the conscious inclusion training there. And what I will do is I'll open up the Q&A, and if I get rid of these, so we can just have new questions. And if you've got any questions, Carol's joined us again, so anything that you want answered, then you please post it in there now. And while you're thinking of those, I will just share the links to the other domains, okay, for you. If you have any questions, of course. I'm right in saying, Carol, on Ty, that you're going to have some briefings, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so the dates for 2023 will be published nearer the time.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But we will try and get them out as early as possible.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry if I sound a bit stilted today. I've had very little sleep, so I apologise if I was a bit stuttery. Anyone else? Oh, thank you. No, you do ask that last one. It is based, so the reflective piece, you don't ask about the entire portfolio, only the evidence that they present as part of that reflective narrative. That's right, isn't it, Carol?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, so you can't question that, because if you think about it, the portfolio, the evidence itself at that point, however much evidence there is, has already, should have been already assessed. So you're not reassessing that information, but you can ask them about any of the evidence linked to their reflective narrative, because they've presented that as evidence to support that part of the assessment. Okay. But
So,
yeah, sorry, Carol.
For 2023 and 2024, the interview element of the IAC will be an hour in length. It's been extended by 15 minutes. It still fits in a day for for a panel assessing 4 trainees. So there's 45 minutes to discuss the reflective piece and the evidence that they've chosen from their portfolio to support the claims they're making or the reflections they've written about in their IAC. And you're looking for evidence that's persuasive, that's relevant, that is really supporting the narrative, and you think it's an appropriate choice. And then there's a 15 minutes to discuss 2 scenario-based questions with the trainees.
There are more examples. I'm just getting them up now. What we've got, they're basically the ones that we shared. They're on our website, and we shared them with the trainees. Now, I will share you the whole section that we did with them as a briefing last year, because it's sort of step by step and it's got examples there, including full examples, so it can be quite useful to see what information that they've had. And it's all public on the website, so it's nothing hidden, and they will get a similar thing again in preparation very soon. I can share it now so you can see it. I'll just put the link in, but I'll just bring it up. So just outlining to them, there was a little workshop I did before you know it, it'll be a year. I can't believe that's almost a few months away from being a year. But yeah, so we did, there's a recording there of the workshop that I did with them around reflective practice. And then we've got the purpose of the IAC there, but also we've got passing the IAC. So those that pass, that they actually read and follow the guidance, use the template, use the marking criteria, etc. But it's got sort of examples of how you do the what, zone what, and now what model. So they've been given those examples, but there's also complete examples of the 5 domains. So from different trainees, and they're actual trainees, they're not ones that have been made up by anybody. They're ones written by actual trainees, and you can have a look at those. So one for each of the domain from different trainees, so that there wasn't too much of their own, too big a proportion of one person's work being shared on there. And we got permission to use it, so don't worry about that. I haven't just put anybody's up there. And then there's some advice there on, those that some of the reasons why people might not actually pass is because they haven't followed the guidance part, mainly, and not got the evidence. So there's a lot of information on there that we share with the trainees that you're more than welcome to have a look at if it helps you to gain that understanding. Okay. And I think that's it from everyone. So thank you very much. But of course, the assessment team are on hand, aren't they, Carol? If they've got any questions at all, please don't hesitate to if you end up contacting me, I'll make sure it gets to the right people. All right, so thank you very much, and thank you for your time. I'll attempt to put my camera on. Okay, thank you.